I'm here to do a flick through of my latest journal, which is themed around the Titanic. The journal is hollow back binding, hand stitched, and is covered in a fabric. It also has some cheesecloth and fabric, lots of sewing. It's also deliberately coated in a finishing that makes it kind of quite sort of rough and weathered looking. I wanted it to look like it might have been a little battered on the Titanic. But this journal might have belonged to Mary Compton, who was a survivor of the Titanic. She boarded the Titanic on the 10th of April with her son and daughter. Sadly, her son was lost, but she and her daughter were rescued. But after the disaster, she continued to travel around the world and probably used a journal like this to record her adventures. I would love to see that journal. So that's a little bit of a bio and her photograph tucked in there. So throughout the journal there are ephemera, quotes and illustrations about the Titanic. Here we start off with a quote from the Titanic's second officer, Charles Lightoller. "I was thoroughly familiar with pretty well every type of ship afloat, but it took me 14 days before I could, with confidence, find my way from one part of the ship to another." He was kind of talking obviously about the sheer size of the Titanic, which was the biggest ship at that time built. There's a bit of collaging here on some vintage book pages, some graphic pages, some genuine vintage poetry book pages. At the beginning of the journal there are quite a bit of advertisements and posters that would have been used at the time, depicting the Titanic and the Olympic, which was her sister ship. They're almost identical. This is the menu which would have been served for lunch on the Titanic. There's quite a bit of sewing in here, lots of pockets, some old advertisements, vintage book pages, another poster for the Olympic and Titanic. Another one here, which serves as a little pocket tuck. Another one here. Another one. This is also a replica of the actual ticket that would have been issued for passengers on the Titanic. Some old encyclopedia pages with some stitching, lace. I've got the pocket here with actual photograph of the Titanic. Some more advertisements. And here we have our next quote and illustration. So the quote here is from Philip Franklin, White Star Line Vice President. "I thought her unsinkable, and I based my opinion on the best expert advice." And here's an illustration of the actual staircase in the Titanic. Another photograph tucked in there. You can keep these or you can remove them and replace them with your own things. Here we have Joseph Bruce Ismay, he was the chairman and managing director of White Star Line at the time. He was the guy who basically built the Titanic and the Olympic, and I think there was another one, don't remember the name of that now, Britannica, I think. He became infamous because he actually survived the sinking. Most of the survivors of the Titanic were women and children, because it was actually his decision before the launch to reduce the number of lifeboats to the absolute minimum. So they were reduced from 48 to 16. Now he boarded one of the lifeboats, whereas most of the lifeboats were carrying just women and children. Most of the gentlemen on the ship died and were lost, but he survived, and he was highly criticised for that, essentially abandoning his own ship and saving himself. Here's another little photo with a little decorated clip. We've got some more pockets here, a bit of ephemera, ticket, and here's a letter, a little note that would have been written by Mary on some letterhead, RMS Titanic letterhead. Printed that out and tucked that in there. Some more vintage poetry pages, vintage book pages. Here is a spread that is dedicated to the musicians of the Titanic. Very heroic. They played on while the ship was sinking. This is the song that they actually played. I've tucked in here as well a copy of the song along with the lyrics of that song. So that's in there, and here's a picture of the band and the musicians themselves. There. This is actually the bandmaster, Wallace Hartley, and he'd actually contemplated being on a sinking ship before he even boarded the Titanic, and he knew exactly how he would respond in such a situation. He believed that that music could prevent panic and create calm, which is why he chose to do that. He'd already chosen the song, the final piece of music that he would play, and that's what they actually played. This is the cellist, who is depicted here. I think his name is J.W. Woodward. Some more of the music there with little pockets. Got a little illustration here of the actual deck, out on the deck of the Titanic. More pockets, more vintage pages, stationery, pocket there. We've got a little illustration here of the starting of the sinking of the ship with the lifeboats. More old vintage stationery and book pages. Another tuck. This is actually the cover of the final report that was done based on the hearings and the investigation of the Titanic disaster, which Joseph Bruce Ismay was. He was a kind of witness, and he gave information about the disaster. Here's another quote from the captain of the rescue vessel, Carpathia, Arthur Rostron. It hardly bears thinking about that if there had been sufficient lifeboats that night, every soul aboard could have been saved. A very sad truth. And here is another ticket. I've got a little tab on this one with the journey depicted on that. We've got a little tag with a boarding pass, and there's a kind of double pocket here. Here's a photograph of the first class dining saloon on the Titanic, held with a little decorative clip. Here is the actual Times Dispatch newspaper article on the actual disaster, and this is Bruce Ismay in a telegram back to his company, White Star Line. Deeply regret to advise you, Titanic sank this morning after collision with iceberg, resulting in serious loss of life. Full particulars later. Got some more pockets, another photograph with a decorated clip, some advertisements, again vintage pages, pockets, another copy of the music was played, another pocket, flap. And we finish with a last illustration of the actual sinking of the ship itself. Then in the back corner tuck here, I've just tucked another copy of the boarding pass. And then this is not obviously an old photo, but this is an image used for the actual musical of the Titanic. I think it was an opera or musical, and that was just of the captain. So I thought I'd tuck that in there. And that is the journal that might have belonged to Mary Compton, survivor.